The chisel went into the stone one stroke at a time. Each stroke threw a small bright dust into the cold morning air. The man worked from the top down, the way the trade had always been taught. Under his hands a shape was forming. It was not a word, and not a picture. It was a count. Marks set side by side, deep and deliberate, each one the width of a fingernail. When the cutting was done, red paint would be pressed into the grooves. The weather would hold that red for longer than the man would hold his own life. This was the north of Britain. The empire had named the place Ebracum. Here the great road ran out, the river turned, and the edge of the Roman world began. Rome built in timber when it was only passing through. It built in stone when it meant to stay. This was stone. It was cut deep and set into a wall that faced the road, so that every man coming up from the south would read it first. The number was a claim. It said, "We were here, and we are not leaving." A legend had raised this town. Now a legion left its mark, the way a man carves his name into something he has built and means to keep. The mason did not invent the number. He had carried it himself on his shield. He had carried it across rivers whose names meant nothing to him, and once across a grey sea. He expected to carry it until his arms were too old for the shield. Then he would leave it to younger men, and they would carry it after him. He worked as though the stone would always have men to stand beneath it. That was the ordinary faith of his trade, and there was nothing foolish in it. The mark he was cutting had already outlived emperors. It had been carried longer than almost anything Rome made. A man setting it into a wall at the edge of the world had every reason to believe it would go on. The stone would outlast him. It would outlast the wall it sat in. It would outlast the town, and the road that brought men to read it. It would still be clear to the eye long after the empire had lost its grip on this northern frontier. Only one thing the stone would not outlast. It would not outlast the thing it named. The number would remain. The men who carried it were the part that did not. For now, none of that had come. The morning was cold, the dust was bright, and the work was nearly done. The man finished the last of the marks and began the border, the plain frame that ran around an inscription like this one. He cut the top edge, and the left, and most of the bottom. Then, a hand's width from the corner, where the line should have turned and closed the frame, the chisel stopped. The groove ended mid-stroke. He set the tool down on the scaffold and stepped back from the wall. Perhaps he meant to return when something else was finished. The frame was never closed. The number was 9. It belonged to a legion, and the legion belonged to Rome, and for a long time that was all anyone needed to know. The 9th Legion had come to Britain in the first wave, when the island was still a rumor to most of the empire. It had crossed with the others, marched inland, and stayed. Where it stopped, it built. Ebracum was its work. A fortress first, then a town that grew up around the fortress, the way towns do where soldiers stay long enough to grow old. The 9th was not new. It had carried its number across more than one province before Britain. It had a name as well as a number, a word that pointed back to Spain, to older campaigns in a warmer country. Men who had never seen Spain still wore the name. That was how a legion worked. It outlived the men inside it. One soldier died or retired, another took his place, and the number went on, unbroken, carried forward like a lamp passed from hand to hand. To belong to the ninth was to belong to something older than yourself and meant to outlast you. A man joined, served his 25 years, and left, if he was lucky enough to leave. The Legion did not leave. It stood where Rome placed it, and it marked that place with its number, on stone, on tile, on the clay seal pressed into a roof before the kiln fired it. The number was everywhere a soldier looked. He stopped seeing it, the way a man stops seeing his own front door. This is the part of the story that is easy to tell. There are stones for it. There are records, the building work, the dedications, the careful Roman habit of writing down who did what, and when, and under whose command. The ninth appears in these the way a familiar name appears in a long letter, expected, unremarkable, present. An observer standing at the edge of that world could trace the Legion through its marks and feel the ground firm underfoot. Here it built. Here it dedicated. Here it carved the 9 again. It is easy to tell because the marks are still being made. The hand is still cutting. The clay is still wet. Later, the marks would grow scarce, and then they would stop, and the telling would become something else entirely. A reading of silence, a counting of what is not there. But that had not begun. For now the 9th was a legion like any other, in a province like any other, doing the ordinary work of staying. In Ebracum the work went on. The fortress grew. The number was cut into a new stone, set into a new wall, painted red, and read by men who had no reason to think it would ever be the kind of thing that needed counting. They were proud of it. Pride was the right feeling, and it cost them nothing, because the number had always been there, and there was no reason on earth it should not always be. Rome could not stop writing its own name. It wrote it on milestones along the roads, counting the distance to the next town in carved numerals. It wrote it on the bases of statues, on the lintels of gates, on the lead pipes that carried water under the streets. A pipe buried in the ground, where no one would ever see it, still carried the stamp of the legion that laid it. The empire marked even the things it meant to bury. This was not vanity, or not only vanity. It was how Rome held a place. A frontier was not held by walls alone. It was held by record, by the endless habit of writing down who built this, who paid for that, which unit raised this wall in which emperor's year. To mark a thing was to claim it. To claim it in stone was to say the claim would outlast the men who made it. The Legion carried its own version of the habit. Every cohort, every working party, left its trace. When soldiers built a stretch of wall, they cut a small stone into it naming the century that did the work, so that centuries later, the word meaning, now, only time, a man could still read which 100 men had laid those particular courses. Pride and account-keeping were the same gesture. The wall remembered its builders because its builders made sure it would. And there was the clay. Before a tile went into the kiln, while it was still soft, someone pressed a stamp into it. The mark of the Legion, the number, sometimes worn, sometimes sharp, depending on how old the stamp was and how tired the hand. A tile is a small thing. It is not a monument. No one cuts a tile expecting it to be read. It goes on a roof, or into a floor, or under a bathhouse to carry the heat, and it does its work in silence for as long as the building stands. But the stamp is permanent. Fired into the clay, It cannot be scraped away or painted over. Long after the red has faded from the grand inscriptions, long after the milestones have fallen, the small stubborn tiles keep their stamps. They are the most ordinary thing a legion makes. And they last the longest, precisely because no one thought them worth destroying. This is worth holding on to, because of what it means later. A legend leaves two kinds of record. The loud kind, the dedication stone, the monument, the named achievement, tells you where the legion wanted to be seen. The quiet kind, the buried pipe, the stamped tile, tells you only where it was. The loud record can be staged. The quiet one cannot. A tile turns up where a tile turns up, and it does not lie about it. So the stamps went on, by the 100, by the 1,000, pressed into wet clay across the province and beyond it, each one the same number, each one meaning nothing in particular at the moment it was made. One of them, fired and laid and forgotten like all the others, would one day be lifted out of the ground in a place it had no business being. But the hand that stamped it did not know that. It pressed the clay, and set the tile to dry, and reached for the next. A legend on the move is a slow thing. It does not rush north like a rumor. It goes at the pace of the slowest cart, the marching pace set by men carrying their own world on their backs. The stake for the knight's wall, the tools, the grain, the iron. The column leaves at first light, and covers its miles and stops, while there is still light to dig. Because a Roman army builds a fortified camp every night. Even one night, even on ground it will leave at dawn. So the 9th went north out of Eboracum, or part of it did, in one of the movements that a frontier demands and a record rarely explains. The road carried them for a while. Roads were Rome's gift to itself. Straight lines pushed across a curved and unwilling country. While there was road, there was Rome. The milestones still counted. The land on either side had been surveyed, taxed, named. Then the road thinned. The good stone surface became gravel, and the gravel became a track, and the track became the memory of a track. The country opened on both sides into something that had not been surveyed and did not care to be. The hills here did not carry Roman names, or carried them so thinly that the names slid off. The men kept marching, the number on their shields, into a place that had no intention of writing anything down. This is the first place to stop and notice where you are. Wherever you are listening from, a room, a road, a window with the dark pressed against it. It is some hour there, late or early, and the light is doing whatever the light does at that hour. The men in this story are walking out of the part of the map that has hours and names, into the part that has neither. If you have ever stood at the edge of something mapped, and felt the next step go soft, you already know the feeling this column was walking into. Stay near them a little longer. The ground is about to change. It changed by degrees, the way real things change. There was no line painted on the earth that said, "Here Rome ends." The frontier was not a line at all, though Rome liked to draw it as one. It was a thickening, a band of country where the writing grew sparse, where the forts sat farther apart, where a marching column felt the space between itself and the next Roman roof grow wider with every mile. And somewhere in that thickening, the nature of the edge changed. Behind them, the frontier had been a line you crossed, a thing with an inside and an outside, the inside warm with record and road. Ahead, it stopped being a line at all. It became an opening, a mouth in the map, where the land simply went on, unwritten, and did not give back what walked into it. The Romans had a name for the country in the far north. They called it Caledonia, and the name did more work than the knowledge behind it. To name a place is to suggest you have measured it. Rome had not measured this one. It had a word for the land, the way a man has a word for the sea. A single sound thrown over something too large and too cold to hold. What lay up there was forest and high ground and weather that came from directions Rome did not control. The people of that country left no inscriptions because they did not write. This is not the same as leaving no trace. They left their dead, their houses, their walls of earth and timber. But they did not do the one thing Rome understood best. They did not carve their claim into stone and sign it. To a Roman, a land without writing was a land that had not yet begun. For a column moving through it, the silence was practical before it was strange. There were no milestones to count the distance. There was no next town with a name to march toward. The scouts read the land itself, the lie of a ridge, the smoke of a fire, the place a river could be crossed. Because the land was the only document on offer, and it was written in a hand no Roman had been taught to read. A legend in friendly country leaves a wake of stone behind it. It builds, it dedicates, it stamps and carves and counts. Here it built only what it could not do without. The camp wall thrown up at dusk, the ditch, the rampart of turf cut from the very ground it stood on. And turf is not stone. Turf goes back to grass. A camp raised at evening and left at dawn leaves a faint green ghost of itself in the earth. A shape you can see from the air 1,000 years later, and nothing a man on the ground would ever call a record. So here is the strange thing, and it is worth saying plainly. The deeper the ninth went, the less it wrote. Not because it had stopped being itself, but because the country gave it nothing to write on, and no reason a Roman recognized to write. The number still rode on the shields. It simply stopped being cut into the world. For the first time, the legion was moving through a place that would not take its mark. And a legion that leaves no mark is a legion that, from a certain distance, cannot be seen at all. Not vanished. Not lost. Only unwritten, present in the country, absent from the record, walking through the one kind of land where Rome's great habit failed it. Somewhere ahead, the column raised another turf wall, and dug another ditch, and posted its watch against a dark that gave nothing back. The wall would be grass again by the next season. No stone went into the ground that night. There was nowhere to put it. Years passed in the ordinary way, which is to say they left almost nothing behind. The campaign in the north ended, as campaigns do, and the part of the legion that had gone came back to the part that had stayed, and Ebrachum took it in. The fortress had grown in the meantime. New walls, new buildings, new stone, and on the new stone, the number again, cut by a younger hand into a surface the older men did not recognize. By now the 9 was simply part of the world. It was on the granary and the gate, on the tombstones in the ground outside the walls where the legion buried its own. It was stamped into the tiles of every roof a soldier slept under. A man could spend a whole day inside the fortress and pass the number 40 times without once reading it, the way you pass your own reflection in a dark window and register only that something moved. This is what familiarity does. It makes a thing invisible by making it constant. The number was everywhere, and because it was everywhere, it was nowhere in particular. Not a claim anymore, not a banner, just the texture of belonging to this place. The men who carved it were proud of it still, in the dim background way a man is proud of his own name. He does not think of it. He would only notice it if it were gone. But step back from the fortress. Step up to where the whole province can be seen at once, and the years run faster than a man can live them. From there the marks are not invisible. From there they are countable. Each carved stone, each stamped tile, sits at a point in time, and the points can be laid out in order, and the order can be read like a pulse. For a long stretch the pulse is steady. The 9 appears and appears and appears. An observer high enough to see all of it at once sees something the men inside the walls cannot. The men see a number that is always there. The observer sees a number that is being written for a finite number of times and is approaching the last of them. Each fresh carving, to the man cutting it, is one of countless. To the eye that can see the whole length of the thing, each fresh carving is one fewer remaining. There is no way to tell from inside a single year that the years of a thing are running short. The carving on the new granary looks exactly like the carving on the old gate. Same number, same depth, same red worked into the grooves. Nothing in the stone announces its place in the sequence. The men cut it the way they had always cut it, with no sense that the supply of such mornings was not endless. And somewhere in those steady years, without ceremony, one of the carvings was the last one. The men did not know it, and the observer, who did know it, said nothing, because there was nothing yet to say, only a number going quietly into stone, and a long pause beginning that no one in the fortress had any reason to hear. There is a tile in the ground on the far side of the sea. Not in Britain. Across the water, on the great river that marked the edge of the empire on the mainland. A different frontier, hundreds of miles from Eboracum, a place the Ninth had no obvious business being. And pressed into that tile, fired hard into the clay before anyone alive could have arranged it as a lie, is the number 9. Remember what was said about the 2 kinds of record. The loud kind can be staged. A monument can be raised to honor a legion that is not there by men who want it remembered. But a tile is not a monument. A tile is laid because someone needed a roof or a floor or a furnace lined, and reached for the materials a working unit had to hand. A stamped tile in the ground means the stamp's owners were near enough to make it, fire it, and use it. The tile does not commemorate the legion. It locates it. So the number that was being cut into stone at Eboracum was also, at some point, being pressed into clay on a river, the far side of the sea. This is the moment the easy story breaks. The easy story said the 9th marched north into the unwritten country and was swallowed there. That the silence in the record is the silence of a grave somewhere under the heather. It is a clean story. It has a place and an ending. The tile on the Rhine does not allow it. Because a legion cannot die in the hills of the north and stamp tiles on a continental river at the same time. One of those things did not happen, or did not happen the way the easy story needs. The mark in the clay says the men, or some of them, came off the island alive, crossed back over the grey sea, and turned up where the empire still needed soldiers, and did the ordinary work of a garrison, lining a furnace, roofing a barracks, leaving the same small stubborn trace they had always left. This should be a relief. It is the opposite. A grave in the north would at least be an ending. a place to point to, a story that closes. The tile takes the ending away and gives nothing in its place. It says, "They were here too, later, elsewhere." It does not say what happened after. It moves the silence rather than filling it. The question does not get answered. It gets larger. For the observer tracing the number through time, the tile is not a discovery so much as a complication, and an honest one. It forbids the comfortable grave. It insists the Legion lived past the moment the legend kills it. And it leaves the real question standing, sharper than before. Not where did they fall, because perhaps they did not fall, but something stranger. If the ninth crossed the sea and went on being a legion, then somewhere ahead lies not a battlefield but a far quieter thing. A point where the marks simply thin and are not replaced. The tile on the river does not show that point. It only proves the point lies further on than anyone wanted. An empire does not hold still. It is always short of soldiers somewhere, a river that needs watching, a war on a border 1,000 miles from the last one, a province that has grown quiet and one that has just caught fire. And legends are how it answers. They are moved like weights on a balance, lifted from the side that is heavy and set down on the side that is light, so that the whole vast thing does not tip. The ninth was a weight like any other. It had been lifted before, out of Spain, into Britain, north and back again. So when it was lifted once more, off the island and onto the mainland, there was nothing strange in it. This is what legions were for. They went where the empire was thin and made it thick again. No one recording the move would have marked it as the beginning of anything. It was a Tuesday's work, the ordinary shuffling of a force across its board. But something happens to a number when the thing that carries it moves often and far. While the ninth sat at Ibaracum, it wrote itself into one place, deeply, year on year, easy to follow. A legion in motion writes differently. A tile here, a mention there, a dedication on a frontier it passed through. The marks scatter, thin out, fall further apart in space and in time. The pulse that was steady at the fortress becomes something an observer has to strain to find. Stay with this for a moment, because you have come to the middle of it now. If you have followed the number this far, out of the quarry morning, north into the unwritten country, across the sea to the river, then you are doing the same thing the observer does, holding the thread as it thins. That attention is the whole of it. If the story has its hold on you, the quiet gestures, staying, listening, marking that you are here, keep these tellings alive and let the next one find its way to you. And now the thread again, because here is where it goes faint. The marks grow harder to date. A stamped tile tells you the legion existed when the tile was made, but tiles are stubborn about years. A stamp can sit in a stack for a season, or a decade before it goes into a wall. The firm points, the ones an observer can pin to a year, grow scarce. And then, somewhere in the scattering, there is a last one. A final inscription that can still be fixed in time. The last firm place where the number stands and says, plainly, here, now, this year. After it, the record does not end in a thunderclap. It just stops offering dates. The last datable mark is not dramatic. It looks like all the others. A number, a surface, a hand that had done this 1,000 times. Nobody cutting it stepped back and felt the weight of being last. Why would they? There was no reason to think the next one would not come, and the one after that, the way they always had. The last firm mark in the life of the ninth was made by someone who fully expected to make another. Picture the last one being made, even though no one can say for certain where it was. That uncertainty is not a flaw in the telling. It is the truth of the thing. Somewhere, on some surface, the number 9 was cut into the world for the final time, and the cutting looked like every cutting that had come before it. The hand was steady. Why would it not be? It had done this work for years, or its father's hand had, or the hand it had learned from. The strokes went in clean, the long ones first, then the cross strokes, the trade's old order. The stone took the iron the way stone does, giving up its bright dust, holding the shape pressed into it. There was nothing in the work to suggest it was different from any other day's work. It was not different. That is the whole weight of it. This is what the observer carries that the mason cannot. The observer has seen the long pulse of the number from above, its first proud cutting at the edge of the world, its years of steady repetition, its scattering as the legion moved. The observer knows this stroke closes the line. The mason knows only that the light is good, and the stone is sound, and there is more work tomorrow. Between those two kinds of knowing lies everything this story is about. He finished the number. Then he cut the border, the plain frame, the way the trade had always closed an inscription. And this time, the frame closed. The line turned at the corner and ran true and met itself. All 4 sides whole, the work complete, nothing left unfinished. A perfect, ordinary stone. The red went into the grooves. It was, in every way a man could have judged it that day, a success. And that is the quiet horror the observer feels, and the mason never will. The unfinished stone, the one left open years before with its frame never closed. That one looks like a wound, like something interrupted. It troubles us. We want to know what stopped the hand. But this stone, the last one, troubles us more, precisely because nothing stopped the hand. It was finished properly. It was done right. The end, when it came to the number, did not come as a break in the work. It came as the work simply not being needed again. The mason cleaned his tools. He stepped back and looked at a good stone well made, and felt the small clean satisfaction of a thing done properly, and went to find his evening. The red dried in the grooves. The stone sat in its wall, sound and complete and indistinguishable from every stone like it. And nothing came after it. No next stone. No next cutting. The hand that would have made the following mark never lifted the iron. Somewhere ahead. For reasons the stone itself would never carry. And the number, finished cleanly, complete in every stroke, was simply never written again. A silence in the record is the hardest thing to notice, because there is nothing there to catch the eye. A battle leaves bodies, ash, a layer in the ground that a spade will one day find. A defeat leaves mourning, and mourning leaves its own marks. The monument to the fallen, the bitter mention in a later writer's account, the gap in a family that someone records. The end of the 9th left none of that. It left less than nothing. It left an absence shaped exactly like the thing that used to fill it. For a while, the silence would not even have looked like silence. The marks had already grown scarce while the legion moved. A year with no new inscription was not alarming. There had been such years before. lean stretches when the Legion was busy with the kind of work that leaves no stone. So the first year of the true silence looked exactly like the quiet years that were not silence at all. No one could have stood at the edge of it and known they were standing at an edge. This is the cruelty of it, if a record can be cruel. There is no moment to point to. With a battle, you can say, here, this day, this field. With the 9th, there is only a widening quiet, recognized long after the fact. The way you realize a sound has stopped only once the room has been silent for some time. You cannot name the moment the sound ended. You can only name the moment you noticed it was gone, and those are never the same moment. And here is the part that turns the whole thing over. Through all of it, the Empire kept writing. It did not pause to mark the absence. It had no reason to. It did not yet know there was an absence to mark. The quarries went on giving up stone. The masons went on cutting. Other numbers, other legions, were carved and stamped and dedicated across the provinces. The great machine of record running exactly as it always had, indifferent and tireless. That is what makes the silence audible in the end. Not emptiness you could miss. It is the contrast. All around the place where the 9 should have gone on appearing, the writing continues, full and confident and unbroken. Every other voice in the chorus holds its note. One voice stops. And because the others go on singing, the gap where that one voice was becomes the only thing an attentive ear can hear. The number did not cry out as it went. It did not get a last word. It was not even granted the dignity of being noticed leaving. It simply stopped being added to a world that went on adding everything else, stone after stone, name after name, year after year. All of it carved deep and painted red and meant, like the 9 had once been meant, to last forever. The world kept its great habit. It just no longer practiced that habit on this one number, and did not pause, and did not look back, and could not have said when it stopped. Rome liked to count itself. From time to time it set down, in stone, the full roll of its legions, the whole standing strength of the empire, listed in order, carved onto a single surface, so that anyone could read the reach of Roman power in one long column of names. It was an act of confidence. Here is everything we are. Count it. To carve such a list was a deliberate thing. Someone gathered the records, set the order, checked the count. This was not a tile stamped in a hurry. It was the empire taking its own inventory, slowly and on purpose, with every intention of getting it right. And on the list, the legions ran in their numbered order, each one a name a Roman would know, the way you would know the names of the great families. The first, the second, the legions of long campaigns and famous fields. Read the list, and you can follow the numbers climbing. The lower ones, then the middle, the 7th, the 8th, and then the column goes on to the 10th, and the names continue up from there, confident and unbroken to the end of the roll. Read it again. Slower. The 7th, the 8th, the 10th. Between the 8th and the 10th, there is no pause, no gap, no blank space left as a courtesy. The stonecutter did not leave room for a missing name, because to him no name was missing. He was not recording a loss. He was copying a list, and on the list he was given, the number simply was not there to copy. The 8th sits against the 10th, as though they had always been neighbors. There is no violence in it. That is what stops the breath. You brace, reading toward the place, the way you brace for a missing stair in the dark. And there is no missing stair. The floor is smooth. The list is whole. It is whole because it has closed over the gap completely, the way water closes over a stone and shows, a moment later, no sign that anything went in. This is how a thing is truly lost. Not in the moment it falls, but later, in the first record made by someone for whom it was never there to begin with. The mason cutting the unfinished stone, years before, had at least known the number. This mason did not. To him the 9 was not a fallen comrade or a painful absence. It was nothing at all, because nobody had handed it to him to carve. And a thing that is not even absent, a thing that has passed below the level where absence is felt, has reached a deeper silence than the grave. The grave at least remembers there was someone to bury. There is a calmer way to read all of this, and it deserves a fair hearing. Perhaps nothing happened to the 9th at all. Nothing, at least, that would have struck anyone living through it as an event. Legions ended in undramatic ways more often than in dramatic ones. This is not a guess. It is the ordinary administration of an empire, and it is worth letting it settle the nerves for a moment. A legion could be broken up, and its men distributed among others to fill their thinned ranks. A legion could be renamed, refounded, folded into a new formation that carried a different number, so that the old one ended not in death, but in paperwork. A legion could be destroyed far away, in a war on some other frontier. Its end recorded in documents that themselves did not survive. So that the silence we hear is not the silence of the legion, but only the silence of lost paper. Any of these would explain the quiet without a single dramatic stroke. No last stand. No massacre in the northern fog. Just an old unit reaching the end of its usefulness and being set down, the way the Empire set down many things, with a clerk's stroke rather than a sword's. And if that is what happened, then there is nothing here to mourn, and nothing to fear. A number left service. That is all. It happens. Sit with that for a moment, because it is probably, in its undramatic way, close to the truth. The 9th most likely did not vanish in any sense that would have frightened the men who lived alongside its ending. It was reorganized, or absorbed, or quietly retired from the rolls, in some province, in some year, by someone who thought the matter entirely routine and did not bother to write down what he had done, because it did not seem worth the ink. The mystery, seen this way, is not a mystery at all. It is a clerical gap. An empire mislaid a number. The world is full of such small, forgivable losses, and we do not lie awake over them. And the observer, who has watched the whole length of it, lets this reading stand. It is reasonable. It is calm. It asks nothing more of us. We can close the matter here, with the number quietly retired and the empire moving on, and feel the small relief of a question that turned out to have a dull and bearable answer. The pulse slows. The tension we carried up the long climb of this story loosens, and lets us breathe, and sets us gently down. It would be an easy place to stop. Except for one thing, and it is a small thing, and the observer almost lets it pass. If the end was so routine, so dull, so administrative, so entirely unworthy of ink, then it is strange that Rome, which wrote down everything, which stamped its buried pipes and signed its hidden walls, which could not lay a tile without recording whose tile it was, wrote down nothing at all about the ordinary, forgettable, bearable end of one of the 4 legions that took Britain. Nothing. Not the reassignment. Not the renaming. Not the clerk's dull stroke. The most thorough record keepers the ancient world ever produced left, on the matter of where the 9th went, a perfect and uncharacteristic blank. Go back to the first stone. The one from the cold morning at the edge of the world, where the mason cut the number deep and began the frame, and then, a hand's width from the corner, set down his chisel and stepped away, leaving the border open. That stone is still there. It outlasted everything, exactly as its makers believed it would, and in a way they could never have wanted. It sat in its wall while the fortress around it changed hands and changed purpose. It sat there while the legion that cut it thinned and moved and made its last mark elsewhere and slipped below the level where absence is even felt. It sat there while Rome itself loosened its grip on the north, and then on the island, and then withdrew across the sea for the last time, taking its roads and its records and its great habit of writing with it. The stone stayed. The unfinished frame stayed open. And here is the turn the whole long climb has been moving toward. When that mason left the border unclosed, it was nothing, an interruption, a man called away, a corner he meant to finish on a morning that, for whatever small and forgotten reason, never came for that particular stone. We were never told why. It did not matter why. But the open frame, meaningless on the day it was cut, has been waiting all this time to mean something. And now it does. Because the number inside that frame met the same fate as the frame around it. Both were left unfinished. Both stopped a hand's width short of complete. The border was a small thing left open by accident, on one morning, by one tired man. The legion was a vast thing left open by history, across years, by forces no single person chose. And yet, they rhyme. The stone, without meaning to, without anyone arranging it, holds a perfect small image of the thing that happened to the men who made it. A line that should have closed, and simply did not. This is what the stone offers anyone who finds it now. Not an answer. The stone does not know where the 9th went, any more than we do. It carries no account of the ending, names no battle, accuses no enemy, confesses no defeat. It carries only the number, cut deep, still legible, still bright in the grooves where the weather has not reached, and the open corner beside it. The unclosed line, the small permanent gesture of something interrupted and never resumed. The men are gone past recovering. Not one of their faces survives, not one of their voices, not the sound of the name they answered to on the morning roll. All of that went into the same silence that swallowed the number on the lists. What remains is the stone, and the deep-cut 9, and the frame that was never finished, outlasting, as stone does, the very thing it was carved to celebrate, and keeping, long after every man who could explain it has turned to nothing. The one shape none of them intended it to keep, the shape of an ending no one wrote down. So we are left where the empire was left, holding a number and no ending to attach to it. The 9th Legion existed. It crossed a grey sea, raised a fortress at the edge of the world, marched into country that would not take its mark, came back, moved on, and then, somewhere in the ordinary motion of a working empire, stopped being written down. That is the whole of what can be said with certainty. Everything after the last firm mark is silence, and the silence does not break, no matter how long you stand and listen to it. We want endings. It is one of the oldest things about us. We want the last stand on the misted hill, the heroic ruin, the enemy named and the defeat accounted for. We want it so badly that for centuries people supplied it themselves, marching the ninth into the northern fog and killing it there, in stories, because a glorious death was easier to carry than an unmarked silence. The truth asks more of us. It asks us to sit with a number that simply stops, and to want no more from it than it can give. And what it can give is not an answer but a feeling, the one this whole story has been moving toward. That the largest things can end without anyone deciding they have ended. That something can be carved deep, painted bright, built to outlast emperors, and still slip out of the world so quietly that the most careful record keepers who ever lived failed to note the day it left. Not through catastrophe, through something far more ordinary and far harder to look at, the slow withdrawal of the need to write a name down. The camera, if there were a camera, would not close on a face. There is no face to close on. It would pull back instead, up and away from the deep-cut 9 in its unfinished frame, until the stone is one grey mark in a wall, and the wall one line in a ruined fortress, and the fortress one quiet point in a country that long ago stopped being the edge of anyone's world. The number is still down there. You could find it if you knew where to look. It is still bright in the grooves. It is still waiting for the next stone that never came. Before the quiet closes over, one last thing. Gently, the way everything here is meant to be done. If you have walked all this way, into a silence that offers no answer and asks you to stay anyway, then perhaps the next silence is for you too. There are other numbers that stop. Other names the record sets down for the last time without knowing it. Other endings written by absence rather than by event. Tell me where you would have the archive turn next, and it will turn there, to another edge, another quiet, another thing the world forgot to finish. The archive keeps what it can. It is glad of the company while it does. For now, the stone holds its number at the bottom of its wall, where it has held it for 19 centuries, and will hold it for as long as stone remembers anything. The legion that cut it is past finding. The reason it ended is past knowing. But the number is still there, deep and clear and waiting, exactly as the man who made it meant it to be. Kept, against all of it, by the one thing patient enough to keep it. The frame around it is still open. It was always going to be us, in the end, who came looking for the corner he never closed.